Hello, Woods Worship family. Happy Wisdom Wednesday. Happy Easter. In case you don't realize it, for all the major feasts of the church, we don't just celebrate on one day. Like, we don't just celebrate Easter on Easter itself. The same goes for, like, Christmas and, I think Pentecost too. We celebrate for an octave of days. It's called the octave of Easter. So not only do we celebrate Easter on Sunday, but through the whole next week we should be celebrating with the same joy and intensity, right? So I hope you're still celebrating with a lot of vim and vigor the resurrection of Jesus. Today I want to talk a little bit about Mary Magdalene. I've been thinking a lot about Mary Magdalene the past few days. A little backstory first that I want to think about first. When we first get introduced to Mary Magdalene in the Gospels, the first thing that the Gospel writers say about her, they say Mary Magdalene, whom Jesus had driven out 7 demons from. So we hear that Jesus drove out 7 demons from Mary Magdalene, but we never really hear the story of that. We don't have a lot of detail on that. So I'll come back to that. Keep that in mind. The other part of Mary Magdalene that obviously I would be reflecting on this week is Mary Magdalene at the resurrection. In a bunch of the Gospels, we see that Mary Magdalene is the first person at the empty tomb. She's the first person to discover that Jesus is not there at the tomb. The one that I want to focus on is, I believe it's the Gospel of John. You can check me on that. I didn't go too hard into my research this week, but that's something for you to do with some free time. In the Gospel of John, the story is that Mary discovers the empty tomb, and she immediately thinks that somebody has taken the body. So she goes and she runs back to the apostles, and Peter and one of the other apostles come running to the tomb to see that it's empty, and they're realizing that this means that he resurrected, but Mary Magdalene is still in sorrow. She doesn't really realize this. So once they go and they go off rejoicing that he's risen from the dead, Mary Magdalene is still there thinking somebody took the body of Jesus and took it away, and she's mourning and she's looking inside the tomb, and she encounters these 2 angels, and then she encounters Jesus himself, but she doesn't recognize him as Jesus at first. So he asks her why she's weeping, and she says, "They've taken my Lord. I don't know where they've put his body." She thinks that this man she's talking to is the gardener, when it's in fact Jesus. And she says, "If you took him, please tell me where you put him, and I'll take the body." So she's in this like mournful state. She's so upset that this could happen. Not only did her beloved Jesus, her teacher, her friend, die this terrible death, but now they took his body. This is what's happening in her mind. So she's in this very sorrowful place. And then Jesus calls her by name, and he says, "Mary." And all of a sudden she recognizes him from him calling her name. And then he tells her to go back and proclaim that she's seen him. She's the first person to witness the resurrection. To go tell the apostles and the other disciples that she's seen the risen Lord. And then she has this joy that she's able to come away with. But what I want to talk about here is the way that Mary recognizes Jesus. She recognizes him when he calls her by name. Now, going back to what I mentioned before, we don't hear the full story of when Mary Magdalene first encounters Jesus. When she was possessed by those 7 demons, I imagine that when Jesus drove them out, he then called her by name. He called her Mary. And she saw him for the first time calling her name. That's the first time she came in contact with Jesus. And then he called her by name lots and lots of times after that. She was with him all the time, going around with the apostles when he was preaching, serving him. All throughout the gospel we hear her mentioned. But I think the connection between the resurrection and when she first met Jesus is something to think about. The first time she encounters Jesus, she encounters him calling her name Mary. And the next time that we're thinking of in the resurrection, when she encounters the risen Lord, she recognizes him when he calls her by name, Mary. Let's think about that in our own lives, especially now. There's a lot of sadness and worry and despair going on in the world, and it's a little bit hard almost to be celebrating Easter joy when we're in this current world situation. So we might be in a sorrowful place, in a mournful place, the way that Mary Magdalene was when she went to the tomb. So sad that Jesus has been taken from her. We might be in that place and be so sad that we can't encounter Jesus in the sacraments right now, that we can't attend Mass in person, we can't receive the Eucharist, we can't go to confession. You might be in that place right now where you're so mournful of your loss of Jesus that it's hard for you to even think of that he might be resurrected, right? The same way that it was for Mary Magdalene. She couldn't even think of that he maybe rose from the dead. She just thought he had been taken from his tomb. And then she recognizes him when he calls her name. And probably is reminded of that first time she encountered Jesus. I want you to think about that this week. Even in this mournful and kind of negative time in our world, I want you to think of Jesus calling your name. Try to recognize him calling your name right now. What is he calling you to do? How is he calling you to serve him and to live in this time? And think back also to the first time you heard Jesus call your name, the first time you encountered him, whether it was when you were a little kid and you first were learning your faith, or if you had a conversion or a reversion later in life. Think about the first time you recognized Jesus calling your name. Just like I'm sure Mary Magdalene thought back to that first time after Jesus had driven out the demons from her, that he called her name and recognized her for who she was, not for the afflictions she had. Think about that time in your life when you found Jesus recognizing you and calling you by name for the first time. And try to open your ears to listening for how Jesus is calling your name now, after his resurrection. Even when you're stuck in despair and you think that all hope is lost, listen for his call and listen for how he wants to fill you with Easter joy, with resurrected joy, and how you can then go out and tell others about what you've witnessed in your life through Jesus, the same way that Mary Magdalene went out and told everybody how she had witnessed the resurrected Jesus. I hope that's a helpful little reflection for you and helps you along in your celebration of Easter this week. And not only the octave of Easter, but we're in the Easter season for 50 days. So all the way through till Pentecost, we should be celebrating our Easter joy. So continue to celebrate that Easter joy. Chris is going to be back next week for the next Wisdom Wednesday. We're still going strong. We're trying to keep it going. We hope you're having a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week. God bless.